Buenos días, tardes y noches a todos los que siguen su canal de Cristiano Moderno. Con ustedes, Víctor Telles. Hoy la transmisión será bilingüe. Para aquellos que quieran escuchar este episodio en español, aquí abajo encuentran el enlace para poder ver este episodio en español. Este episodio ya se ha dado en español previamente. Este enlace que se encuentra aquí abajo los llevará a ver aquel video sobre este preciso tema cuando lo di en español. Pero lo voy a dar ahora en inglés porque la comunidad de habla inglesa está queriéndose poner al corriente con nosotros en cuanto al estudio de Flavio Josefo. Saludos a Librería Guadalupana Nuevo Amanecer en el Anaheim Marketplace. Okay, today's transmission will be in English. For those wishing to see it in Spanish, the link below, that's where you can see the same video when the day I uploaded it in Spanish. This video is available in Spanish at the link below. Este video está disponible en español en el enlace de abajo. Ahora continúo con el inglés. Voy a dejar el enlace aquí para que por la duración, para quien quiera ver el contenido en español, pueda accesarlo aquí. I'm going to leave the link to the Spanish video down below so that anybody who desires to watch it in Spanish, they can access it. Now, well then, why is it important to study Flavius Josephus? Who was Flavius Josephus? And why would I dedicate this week to him? Well, Flavius Josephus was a historian. He is famous. Anybody who wants to study anything about the history of Israel in the first century, the history of the Jews in the first century, you can pretty much get that through Flavius Josephus. He was a historian who lived in the first century. As such, he was a contemporary of the Lord Jesus Christ. He lived during the time Jesus Christ lived in the time in the region of Israel. Why is he important? Well, he is important because first of all, he is one of the important historians of Jewish history. One of the very early historians of Israel. So anybody who wants to know the truth of what's going on now in Israel and the truth of the history of Israel in the first century, they study Flavius Josephus. Another reason why it's important, especially in the field of biblical studies, is because the Old Testament, whether you get the Catholic Old Testament or the Protestant Old Testament, you still have the same problem. There's a gap of a few years. A gap that needs to be filled if you are to properly understand what's going on in the time of Jesus. For example, the Protestant Old Testament ends around the time of Queen Esther, who ruled the Persian Empire. There is a gap of 400 years between the end of the Protestant Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. There's a gap of 400 years. Where Protestant Old Testament ends when the Persians are ruling, New Testament begins after Rome has taken over. What happened between one and the other? There is a gap to be filled. Flavius Josephus fills this gap with his history called The Jewish War and another book called Jewish Antiquities. Catholic Bibles, which have even more books, still have the same issue because the Catholic Bible ends around the time of the Maccabee revolt with the books of the Maccabees. That's around the time of the year 164. There is still that gap of 160 years to be filled in order to know what is going on. I want to send greetings to Hermano Pepe, who's telling us good morning. Good morning to you as well, Hermano Pepe. And now, let us continue with what we are talking about right now. Now, the Catholic Bible still has a gap of 160 years to fill. The Catholic Bible ends with the time of the Maccabean Revolt. The New Testament begins with the ruling of the Roman Empire. How does it become from the Maccabean Revolt? How do we get to the Roman Empire? Well, Flavius Josephus fills this gap through his work. Flavius Josephus wrote 5 books. He wrote an autobiography, um, 3 3 books about the history of Israel. One of them is called the Jewish War, which is the one we are studying right now. And the 5th one is an apologetics work where he defends Judaism from pagan philosophies. Having said this, let's jump on. Last time we saw Flavius Josephus, sometime last year, we had read chapter 2 of his book, Jewish War. It is several books. I think it's about 7 or so. But we're in book 1, chapter 3. Before we understand what's going on, before we go into the actual reading, it is important to see what has transpired, what happened in the previous chapters, and here we see it. This is the family tree of the Maccabees, also known as the Hasmoneans. They were established by They were established by Mattathiah Maccabeus in the year 167 BC. The reason why the Maccabees and the revolt came up was because you remember that after the fall of the Greek Empire, after the fall of Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire was split into 4 branches. The 2 strongest branches were the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. However, the Seleucid dynasty around this time of the Maccabees was being ruled by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who was a very cruel leader. To get information about how evil this ruler was, you can read the books of the Maccabees. Now, for the Protestants who may be seeing this and have complaints about using the books of the Maccabees, tell me, if the Maccabees were not part of the Jewish canon, why do the Jews celebrate a Hanukkah? Hanukkah was established from a miracle that occurred and that is discussed in the book of the Maccabees. Enough said. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes came about persecuting the Jewish people. Just like today, we have Hamas and terrorists persecuting and oppressing the Jews of Israel, and Israel fighting back. So too was the issue 2,180 years ago during the time of the Maccabees, where the Greeks, led by Antiochus IV Epiphanes, were trying to force the Jewish people to become pagans or else. So you have a group of people who rose up in arms to fight against the pagan practices and for their right to worship God freely. And the person who rose up and challenged their pagan persecutors was this priest called Mattathias Maccabee. He had 5 children: Judas, Jonathan, Eleazar, John Gadi, and actually it was Johannes Gadi and Simon Tassi, because the first 2 generations of the Maccabees, they were so proud of their Jewish ancestry. Only that in English we call him John Gadi, but in Hebrew he did not go by John Gadi. He went by Yohanan Gadi. Gadi, of course, was his nickname. It means the gazelle. Now, when Mattathias died in 160 BC, this is a typo here, Judas Maccabee takes over in the year 166 after the death of his father, Mattathias. And he led the Maccabee revolt for a period of 6 years. When he died, his brother Jonathan Aphes took over. We do not see that Eleazar had any position to take over because he died during the time Judas led the revolts when they confronted military elephants. You see, um, Antiochus IV Epiphanes came in with military elephants that were being used as tanks. You would have He would come in with an elephant, and on top of the elephant there were kind of like baskets with four people. The person steering the elephant and three archers, one facing each side and one facing the back. Well, Eleazar sees a very fancily decorated military elephant and goes right underneath and stabs the elephant. Sure enough, that elephant falls on Eleazar and smashes him. Then Simon Tassi takes over after the death of Jonathan Aphes. John Tassi has three children. By the time John Tassi finishes the ruling, the Maccabees are at peace. They have defeated them for the most part. There's still certain exceptions. The um, forces of the Syrians, the Greeks, such as Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, John Hyrcanus, feeling a little bit at ease, changes his name from Jonathan to Ioannis Hyrcanus. He adopts a Greek name. So, John Hyrcanus, by doing this, he is accepting the leadership of the Greeks. He is accepting to go back to to being under Greek dominion. Also, the Greek leader Demetrius establishes a tribute so high that John Hyrcanus invades the tomb where King David is buried to take some of the gold that was stored there to pay that tribute. Both these things made the religious community angry at John Hyrcanus because they see the rule of John Hyrcanus as a betrayal of everything that the Maccabees did. And it all goes downhill from here. Now, today's chapter 3, begins at this point with the death of John Hyrcanus. Let us begin and let's see what we get to learn about John here, about the house of the Maccabees, the history of the house of the Maccabees in chapter 3 of Josephus' a history book called The War of the Jews. Now, for after the death of their father, that is John Hyrcanus, whom we saw about, you saw that John Hyrcanus had 5 children. Let's go back and quickly see who were the 5 children of John Hyrcanus. I forgot to emphasize that very important thing so that we know where we are. So let's quickly look one more time at this genealogy so that we see who are the children of John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus had 5 children, 3 of them who are very specifically named in history, which we're going to read about the first 2 today, which are Antigonus and Aristobulus. His third child was Alexander Gennaeus, and he also had 2 other sons who are rarely ever mentioned in history because unfortunately they did not have an opportunity to make a name for themselves, and we're about to find out why. Now, having said this, now let's dive into the story of what Flavius Josephus actually wrote. So join us. Um, he titled this how Aristobulus was the first to put a diadem. This is the oldest son of Flavius Josephus. And after he had put his mother and brother to death, died himself when he had reigned no more than a year. Okay, so one thing about Flavius Josephus, he likes to go into details, so bear with us. Notice I will be reading from the document and commenting on what shows up. Let's see. For after the death of their father, John Hyrcanus, the other of them, Aristobulus, changed the government into a kingdom and was the first that put a diadem on his head 471 years after the month after our people came down into this country, when they were set free from the Babylonian slavery. Who are they talking about as our people? He's talking about the history of the people of Israel. You'll see Israel, 400 years before the event I'm reading about, to be specifically 476 years prior to this, the Babylonians had invaded and taken over Israel. With the fall of Babylon, the Persians took over, and the Persians gave authorization for the people of Israel to go back and rebuild the temple. It's what we call the Second Temple. That is what he's talking about here. But since the people had been constantly controlled by that time by foreign forces, after the Persians came the Greeks, after the Greek, and so on, no Jewish person was able to call himself king of the Jews since the time of Zedekiah, who ruled at the time the Babylonians took over. Now, finally, we see that the Maccabees got a somewhat short period of independence. But neither the Maccabees, nobody the first two generations of the Maccabees dared call themselves king. Now, John Hyrcanus, he was the third generation. And we get down to the fourth generation, that is about 60 years after the Maccabees had freed Israel from Greek control, that Aristobulus, the great grandson of the or we could say the grandson of the great Maccabees who freed Israel, the great grandson of the founder of the Maccabees, decides to crown himself as king of the Jews. So that for the first time in almost 500 years, there is a person who calls himself king and decides to rule Jerusalem as king. Now, of his brother, he appeared to have an affection for Antigonus. You see, Aristobulus, out of his four siblings, he had a favorite sibling. Aristobulus had a favorite sibling, and this was Antigonus, the second of the siblings. So he proposed to share the kingdom, as we're going to see. They appeared to have an affection for Antigonus, who was next to him, and made him his equal. In other words, stay equal in power. But for the rest, he bound them and put them in prison. So, in order not to have any rivalries between him and his other siblings, he decided to arrest the other three children, Alexander Jannaeus and the two younger ones who are seldom ever named. Not only then, he also proved to be a very bad son, for he was very cruel with his own mother. It tells us here. He also put his mother in bonds. So, for his mother not to interfere with his rule, Aristobulus betrays his mother, and has her put into prison in chains. Not only that, for her contesting the government with him. So, in other words, when um, John Hyrcanus dies, he puts everything in the hands of his wife. But Aristobulus, once he was old enough, rebels against his own mother and arrests them, claiming that as a woman she had no right to rule any kingdom. Remember, a lot of people had back in the kind of concept back in those days. So he locks her up because of her claiming the very same rights that John Hyrcanus, her wife, John and Aristobulus' dad gave her. Aristobulus doesn't agree with that and thinks that since he is the oldest one, the rule of the kingdom should be for him, not for his mother. So he arrests his mother and puts her in prison. Not only that, John had her to be the governor of the public affairs. He also proceeded to the degree of barbarity as to cause her to be pined to death in prison. What does it mean to be pined? To be pined to death means that never again to be allowed to eat or drink for the rest of her life. So at the very moment that Aristobulus arrests his own mother, he decides to be the worst son ever and gives commands that nobody is allowed to give her any food or drink. She is not allowed to eat or drink anything for the rest of her life. So she withered away in prison from dehydration and starvation. Uh, let's go on to the next section. The next section we see goes as follows. But vengeance circumvented him in the affair of his brother Antigonus, whom he loved, and whom he made his partner in the kingdom. He elevated his brother Antigonus as second in the kingdom. He shared power with him. For he slew him by the means of the calumnies which ill men about the palace contrived against him. You see, what is the worst thing when two people share kingdom? Intrigue, gossip. A lot of people who wanted to see these two rulers fall and collapse started spreading rumors against Antigonus. We're going to see what kind of rumors. And these rumors led to the downfall of Aristobulus and his beloved brother Antigonus. At first, indeed, Aristobulus would not believe the reports, partly out of affection he had for his brother, and partly because he thought that a great part of these tales were owing to the envy of their relators. So he started right. At first, he refused to believe all the gossip that was being said against Antigonus because he suspected that they were just trying to separate them, that it was a plot to divide and separate the two brothers. But obviously, it was. So at first, um, Aristobulus saw this for what it really was, intrigues of the court to separate and destroy this kingdom. So he refused to listen to the gossip. Uh, However, as Antigonus came once in a splendid manner from the army to the fair festival, wherein our ancient custom to make tabernacles for God, it happened in those days that Aristobulus was sick. And at the conclusion of the feast, Antigonus came to it with his armored men about him. Now, he's talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. This feast is called Sukkot and it tends to be given every year around what for us in the Western world is September, October. In the particular year we're talking about, the time we're reading about is the year 104 BC. So these events happen approximately 2,128 years ago. And we see that there's an important religious feast, the Feast of Tabernacles, which that year fell on October the 8th, from October the 8th through October the 15th, 104 BC, um, Aristobulus becomes sick, whereas his brother Antigonus, whom he loved so dearly, is out fighting Aristobulus' wars with the Greeks. So now one brother is getting weaker, Aristobulus is getting weaker because of his sickness, and Antigonus is getting stronger. Now, this comes to present a problem for Aristobulus, considering all the gossip that was being said about Antigonus. To be specific, all these people who were spreading rumors about Antigonus, they were trying to make Aristobulus think that Antigonus was going to rebel and have his own brother, Aristobulus, the king himself, killed. They were saying, Aristobulus, Aristobulus, your brother Antigonus is going to kill you. At first, Aristobulus did not believe it because he thought that it was all a bunch of gossip given by the court who were slandering Antigonus. But the moment that Aristobulus gets sick and Antigonus walks into Jerusalem with all his glorious army to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, now Aristobulus begins to believe the lies that were being said against his brother Antigonus. Let's see, where were we? Groups of peace. Antigonus came up to first about him, and this way he was adorned with in the finest manner possible. He was dressed in all his military armor. And that in a great measure to pray to God on behalf of his brother. You see, Antigonus really loves his brother. He doesn't plan to kill him. He goes to the temple, thanking God for the victories and asking God to give his brother back the health. Now, at this very time, it was all these men, all these ill men, all the evil men came to the king and told him in what pomp and manner the armed men came and with what insolence Antigonus marched, and that such his insolence was too great for a private person, and that accordingly he was come with a great band of men to kill him, for he could not endure this bare enjoyment of royal honor when it was in his power to take all the kingdom for himself. Okay, so picture this. You have Aristobulus laying in bed. He is very sick. His brother is fighting the wars for him. His brother Antigonus. Having been victorious in war, Antigonus comes in, noticing that it's a very religious celebration. He walks in with his army to give thanks to God for the victories in war and to ask for his brother's health. Seeing this, all the enemies of the king run up to him and they give him all these lies. Hey, your Majesty, look, your brother came in with all of his army, very armed, and he's coming here to kill you. He doesn't want to be the second in command. He wants your position. They're bearing false witness against Antigonus because they want Antigonus destroyed. But now Aristobulus thinks up of a plan because now he's beginning to think, could this be true? Could this be false? I got to do something about this. Now Aristobulus, by degrees, that means little by little, and unwillingly gave credit to these accusations. He's beginning to believe it, but he's not sure how much of it he should believe. Yeah, and accordingly, he took care to discover his suspicion openly, though he provided to be secure against any accidents. So he placed the guards of his body in a certain dark subterranean passage. He went into hiding. Around Jerusalem, there are a lot of tunnels. So Aristobulus went into hiding into one of these tunnels and had a bodyguard surround him. For he lay sick in a place called formerly the Citadel, though afterwards its name was changed to Antonia. This is a fortress that was right next to the Temple of Jerusalem, just north of it. Today, the land that used to be the citadel, this fortress has been destroyed, and today a Muslim preschool sits right where this fortress used to sit. It was right next to the temple on the north end. Okay, against the Romans. He gave orders that if Antigonus came unarmed, they should let him alone. But if he came to him in his armors, they should kill him. This was a sign. According to Aristobulus, this was a sign. If Antigonus's intentions for his brother were peace, he would come unarmed. But if Antigonus would show up with a weapon in his hand, then Antigonus' intentions would be to kill him. You see, Aristobulus still loves his brother so much, and he's trying to put Antigonus to a test to see how much can he still trust Antigonus. Can he still trust him or not? So to test the trustworthiness of Antigonus, Aristobulus calls for him. And now Aristobulus says, okay, if he comes to me and he's unarmed, that's because we're still brothers. Everything's still cool between us. But if he comes with a weapon, that's because he wants to kill me. He also sent some to let him know beforehand that he should come unarmed. But upon this occasion, the queen very cunningly contrived the matter with those that plotted his ruin, for she persuaded those that were sent to conceal the king's message. All right. Aristobulus is trying to test whether he can trust his brother, and the sign will be whether he shows up armed or not. He even lets his brother know, I want to see you, come visit me, but do not bring any weapons. But we see that Aristobulus' own wife is evil, conniving, and contriving. She wants to destroy her husband and her husband's brother. He wants to destroy the two brothers. So in order to do this, she develops a plan, knowing that the sign of innocence would be that he shows up without weapons. And knowing that if Antigonus shows up with a weapon, he was to be killed, she arranges so that Antigonus shows up with weapons so that this way he becomes killed. So that this way Antigonus is killed. She contrives, she makes a plan and tells the people the opposite of what the king wanted them to say. She persuaded that those that were sent to conceal the king's message, but to tell Antigonus how his brother had heard he had got the suit of the armor made with fine martial ornaments in Galilee, and because his present sickness hindered him from coming to and seeing all that finery, he very much desired to see him now in his armor, because said he, in a little time thou art going away from me. In other words, Aristobulus tells his men, tell Antigonus to come without armor, without weapons, so that I know I can trust them. The queen tells them, stop. Don't tell them that. Tell him to come very well armed. Tell him that his brother wants to see the magnificence of his armor. So Antigonus shows up, as we're going to see, all finely dressed in his military vest, which was a sign that Aristobulus would not trust him, according to what Aristobulus had planned. So the queen decided to set things up so that her own husband, King Aristobulus, could not trust his very own brother, Antigonus, and even have him killed. As soon as Antigonus heard this, the good temper of his brother, not allowing him to suspect any harm from him, he came along with his armor on to show it to his brother. But when he was going along that dark passage, which was called Stratus Tower, he was slain by the bodyguards and became an eminent instance how calumny destroys the goodwill and the natural affections, and how none of our good affections are strong enough to resist envy perpetually. In other words, as much as he loved and took care of his brother, none of this was good enough, because eventually the envy of the queen and all the evil members of the court plotted against him and fooled Antigonus into thinking that Aristobulus wanted to see the whole armor and all the weaponry. Antigonus comes and says, "Oh, my great, wonderful brother is so interested in my military exploits. He wants to see what magnificent armor I have attained. Let me go show it off to him." And he goes down to look for his brother. But since the bodyguard were given instructions that if the brother was to show up with armor and weapons, he was to be killed. The bodyguards did not know the plot that the queen developed against them and has them killed. Now, and truly anyone would be surprised at Judas upon the occasion. He was of the sect of the Essenes. Now, Flavius Josephus is taking us into another view. He's telling us about yet another person. Among the people of Israel, there were at this time 13 different groups of Judaism. 13. Normally, we tend to think of Judaism as one religion, but just like with Christianity, we have Catholics, we have Protestants, we have Copts, we have Orthodox. So too the Jews at this time had the different groups. They had the Pharisees, they had the Sadducees, they had their Zealots, and even though most people don't want to admit it, the Samaritanism is a branch of Judaism. And they also had a branch of Judaism called the Essenes. These people lived like monks in the desert. They had a very active, very rich spiritual life. And among these Essenes was a lesser known prophet called Judas. It was below, way below, because there are no books. This prophet Judas of the Essenes wrote no books, therefore he made no canon. But he was as this Essene saw Aristobulus, he made a prophecy. He prophesied that that Antigonus was going to die in a place called Stratus Tower. Now, Stratus Tower was a name given to a tower that was pretty close to what is now Lebanon. Quite a long distance walk from where they actually were. Maybe about a month distance travel between Jerusalem to that Stratus Tower. It's important to know this to understand what's going on. He was one of the sect of the Essenes and had never failed or deceived any of his predictions before. Everything he predicted came true. Now this man saw Antigonus as he was passing along by the temple, and cried out to his acquaintance. They were not a few who attended upon him as his scholars. So he was surrounded by a lot of people. He was This prophet was popular among the Essenes because his prophecies never failed. And now he shouts something up. Oh, strange, said he, it is good for me to die now, since truth is dead before me, and somewhat that I have foretold had proved false. So now he sees Antigonus walking. He had predicted that this day, this very same day, Antigonus was going to die at Stratus Tower. But instead of seeing him dead, Antigonus is walking right in front of him, walking from the temple to visit his brother in full armor. Uh, Before me, and someone that I have foretold had proved false. In other words, saying, I might as well die. My first prophecy failed. First Antigonus in this day is alive who ought to have died this day, and the place where he ought to be slain according to that fatal decree was Stratus Tower, which is at the distance of 600 furlongs from this place, and yet 4 hours of this day are over already, which point the time renders the prediction impossible to be failed. Now, he's saying, my prophecy failed. This guy's walking right in front of me. He was supposed to have died way over there in Stratus Tower. And now this is the 4th hour of the day. There's no way he's going to get from here to Stratus Tower on time for this prophecy to be fulfilled. And that's a month's travel over there. How can he die over there where it would take him 4 months to travel? How's he going to get from here to there today when he's supposed to be dying over there according to the prophecy I gave? And when the old man had said this, he was dejected his mind, and so continued. So the prophet got depressed because his prophecy failed. But in the end times, news came that Antigonus was slain in a subterranean place, which was itself also called Stratus Tower, by the same name with that Caesarea which lay by the seaside, at this ambiguity in what caused the prophet's disorder. This prophet did not know that Aristobulus had named one of the towers. Remember, the fortress that we spoke about, Antonia, had 4 towers on its corner. And Antigonus had named one of these towers in honor of the original Stratus Tower. So you have Stratus Tower over there, and then over here in the fortress where Antigonus was going to visit his brother Aristobulus, one of those towers was also called Stratus Tower. It was named after the other place. So there were 2 places called Stratus Tower. And now we find out that this prophet's premonition was true after all. Antigonus was killed in the Stratus Tower, but not the original Stratus Tower, but the Stratus Tower that was named after the original. Hereupon Aristobulus repented of the great crime he had been guilty of. Now Aristobulus regrets having his brother killed. He finds out the truth behind it. This gave occasion to the increase of his distemper. So now that Antigonus has been killed, his beloved brother, Aristobulus now is sad. He is mourning. He's crying over his brother, whom he had killed, thinking that this beloved brother was going to kill him. He thinks his brother is going to kill him, so he has his brother killed. Then he finds out the truth, and now he is mourning. He is sad, and he goes into depression, which makes his sickness worse than it was at the beginning. Hermano Manuel Juárez, nadie está jugando. Usted ya le he explicado a usted varias veces mi horario y usted sabe que estamos en el proyecto, hermano. Le hablaré en cuanto pueda. Sorry, that was an announcement I had to do for one of my brothers in the faith from Panama. I needed to tell him what was going on. Now, there is something I'm resolving with him. We'll talk about that later. Let's continue. Now, he also grew worse and worse, and his soul was constantly disturbed at the thoughts of what he had done. In other words, he remembers of what happened. Oh, I should not have killed my brother. Oh, why did I give him this sign? I should not have never brought him. What did I expose my brother to? He is crying over what happened to his brother, till his very bowels being torn to pieces by the intolerable grief he was under, he threw up a great quantity of blood. So from this depression, his sickness got so bad, he started vomiting blood out of his interior. And as one of those servants that attended him carried out that blood, he, by some supernatural providence, slipped and fell down in the very place where Antigonus had been slain. And so he spilled some of the murderer's blood upon the spot of blood of him that had been murdered, which still appeared. So Aristobulus kills his brother, thinking that his brother wants to kill him. Once his brother is dead, and Aristobulus regrets killing his brother, he goes into depression so bad his sickness gets worse, and now he starts vomiting blood. His chambermaid is out taking all the vomited blood from the king, and as he's walking out, he steps on the blood of Antigonus. They had not yet cleaned the blood. So we see all of this is happening the same day. So the very same day that Antigonus was killed, Aristobulus' assistant is taking out Aristobulus' blood from his sickness, steps on Antigonus' blood, slips, spills all of Aristobulus' blood on top of Antigonus' blood. So now the floor is stained with the blood of two men, Aristobulus and Antigonus. And there were witnesses who saw this, and they saw it as an omen. Hereupon a lamentable cry among the spectators, the witnesses of that fall, as if the servant had spilled the blood on purpose in that place. And as the king heard that cry, he inquired what was the cause of it. And while nobody durst tell him, he pressed them so much more to let him know what was the matter. So at length, when he had threatened them and forced them to speak, they told, whereupon he burst into tears and groaned and said, so I perceive. Okay, now let's picture what's going on. Antigonus comes, he's killed. His blood is still staining the ground. King's attendants, they gain the blood of the king from out his sickness, is carrying the blood, the king's blood out, slips and spills the king's blood on top of his brother's blood. Now you have the blood of both Aristobulus and Antigonus. A lot of people see this happening, and they take it for a bad omen. But since Aristobulus was one of those evil kings who killed his own mother, they were afraid to tell Aristobulus what was going on, afraid that even though he was sick, he would give orders to have them killed. But Aristobulus insisted so much, telling him that he demanded to be told what had happened. Once Aristobulus finds out what has happened, he gets even sicker now. Because now it is not just his sickness. It is also his sadness at the death of his brother. Now he is aware of both bloods being mixed on the floor right on the same place of Antigonus's death. And Aristobulus sees it as an omen, as a sign from the heavens, and gives his interpretation. So I perceive I am not like to escape the all-seeing eye of God as to the great crimes I have committed, but the vengeance of the blood of my kinsman, Antigonus, pursues me hastily. Oh, thou most imprudent body, how long wilt thou retain a soul that ought to die on account of that punishment? I ought to suffer for a mother and a brother slain. Now he is guilty of it. He feels guilty for everything he has done. He sees in the fact that his own blood got spilled and mixed with his brother's blood, and sees it as an omen of God's judgment against him. And now demands, and now he's asking for death because he is aware that after having killed his own mother, after having killed his siblings, he is worthy of being put to death. How long shall I myself spend my blood drop by drop? Remember, he was vomiting blood. Let them take it all at once, and the ghosts no longer be disappointed by a few parcels of my bowels offered to them. The blood that was spilled and mingled with Antigonus's blood. As soon as he said these words, he presently died when he had reigned no longer than a year. And this happens in the year 103 BC. So in the year 103 BC, he kills his brother Antigonus, and he himself dies. This, therefore, we can say that it happened in the fall. We can say October 15, 104 BC. Excuse me, 103 BC. So this October 15th, we could say that it's going to be the 2127th anniversary of the death of both Antigonus and Aristobulus.